Hi, welcome again to the Radio Merit Badge. This block covers requirements 9A3 and 9A4 on Q signals and emergency operations. Let me take a moment and reintroduce ourselves here. I'm joined by Mr. John Callahan, K3JDR, Mr. Tom Costello, KC3TMT, Mr. Wayne Hunter, KC3SQI, and I'm Ron Medikevich, WA3VEE, and the trustee of K3DTS, the Spark to Space Amateur Radio Group, of which we're all a member, and we are bringing this to you from that group. Okay, Q signals and abbreviations. Back in the very early days of radio, everything was Morse code. Of course, in the Titanic days, 1912 and so on, everything was done by Spark and Morse code. There was no voice. So things needed to be abbreviated to facilitate communication. So this group, which was the aviation group actually, had come up with a list of 3-letter codes that meant particular things in communications. And they became Q signals. And they can either be a question or an answer. And they became the shorthand for Morse code. It really shortened up some of the communications. And it was also intended for use in the shipping industry. And then, of course, as I mentioned later in aviation, since all communications was by Morse code, these they made the messages very brief. Some of these codes still exist in aviation, but Q signals today are used mostly in ham radio, in voice, and Morse code. There's an interesting link at the bottom that gives you some of the history of Q signals that you may want to take a look at. Here's some pretty common ones that are used by us on the air these days. QRM is if you've got interference by someone. Hopefully it's inadvertent, it's not willful, because willful interference is highly illegal. But you would say something like, I have QRM, let's QSY or change to another frequency. Okay. QRN is static or noise, electrical noise, atmospheric noise like lightning, so on and so forth. QRP is low power. If you're talking to someone in Morse code and you want to ask them to slow down, you would send QRS in Morse code. Say, hey, could you please send more slowly? I'm having trouble copying. QRT going off the air. This is Whiskey 3 Golf. QRT means we're shutting down our transmitter for the day. We're closing our station down. QRX means wait a few minutes. We will be using this one on the air as we're passing the microphone from one scout to another when we're talking on the repeater. You say, this is Whiskey 3 Golf, QRX, as I get ready for the next scout. QRZ, who's calling me? And we'll give some examples of these things. We have fading, we have QSL. QSL means, did you get it? We already gave you an example of that earlier in our session here. QSO means a conversation. Let's have a QSO. Let's have a QSO. We would say QSO. Let's have a conversation over the radio. QTH is, where am I located? My QTH is in Westchester. Our QTH here is in Exton. 73 is best regards. CQ, I'm calling CQ, CQ, CQ. This is Whiskey 3 Golf. Anyone out there who can help us talk to some scouts? This is Whiskey 3 Golf. Clear and listening, QRZ. So those are some examples. Give you an example of how these would actually be used. When you missed hearing a call or someone who is calling you on the radio, you would say something like this. This is Whiskey 3 Golf, QRZ. And then you would say, the next example, if you're talking with someone and want to move to another frequency, KC3TMT, this is Whiskey 3 Golf. Tom, let's move off the repeater and over to 146.52 simplex. KC3TMT, this is Whiskey 3 Golf. QSY to 146.52 simplex. That's how that would go. When you're talking to someone and their signal is fading in or out, you would say, this is especially true if you're doing shortwave communications, you would say, you have some QSB on your signal. You're basically saying, hey, you've got some fading. If you want to try to hear a weak station better and you ask them to increase power, what you would say is something like, I'm having trouble hearing you due to QSB. Can you QRO? In other words, can you increase your power? They're really helpful on CW. If you're using voice, you just tell them, hey, you've got fading. Can you increase your power? But it does make the communications go a little more quickly and a little more efficiently. And then, of course, when you want to run low power, you say, yeah, I'm going to switch off my amplifier and operate CW, Morse code. In that mode, I only need to run QRP, which is generally understood to be, in general, less than 10 watts. Okay, finally, we want to talk about emergencies in radio. This is directly right out of Part 97 of the Federal Communications Commission rules for the amateur radio service. And basically, it says this, that you can use any means possible with your station to draw attention in times of emergency when there is a threat to the immediate safety of human life and immediate protection of property. However, and this is a very important provisor, when no other communication systems are available. If you've got good cell coverage, you have to use that first in the emergency. And it's probably even better because you can get directly to 911 rather than calling a ham radio operator to have 911 for you. If there's a station in distress, you can use any means possible to attract attention on amateur radio, and you need to make sure that you've exhausted all other possibilities first before you use this. Another note here is that there are a lot of very inexpensive radios on the market these days that are available from offshore suppliers. Be advised that these radios are what we call open transmit. They are not only transmitting on amateur radio frequencies, but some of them are actually transmitting very illegally on frequencies such as aviation, public service, fire emergency, first responder frequencies. It is highly, highly illegal, almost in all cases, to operate on those frequencies without a license and without due authorization. You can be subject to the Communications Act of 1934, 10 years in prison and $10,000 fine for doing that. It's very serious penalties for doing that, because you could be putting hundreds of people's lives in jeopardy if you cause harmful interference. So just be advised that some of these radios out there are open transmit. So to summarize, you can use any radio at any time to get help during an emergency when life or injury is at stake, but all other means have to be exhausted first. If you're a ham radio operator, like one time I was in this situation a couple times over the last 50 years of working. I was listening to a repeater and there was a conversation going on and there was an emergency on the road. And I didn't have my phone handy right then and there. And in one case, this was many years ago before cell phones were very, very prolific. I came upon a situation where there was an accident on the road and it looked like there was personal injury. And there was a conversation. I had to go in and I'd say, break. I have emergency traffic to convey. And I broke into the conversation on the radio. Of course, I'm licensed. I could do this. And so they took the call and they called 911 and got the help out there. And I stayed there until the first responders came, and it took about 10 minutes for them to get there. So this is how you would break into a conversation on ham radio. Mayday is an international word for requesting help by radio. Do not ever use it in any kind of form, especially in a joking way. Do not ever use this unless there is a true emergency. This is a very serious word to use on the radio. Emergency also works, like I just indicated. I didn't even use Mayday. I have an emergency here. I need some priority traffic. Traffic means message or communication in amateur radio. So break, I have emergency traffic, emergency communication. I need immediate help. Someone needs to call 911 and so on. If you're in Morse code, by the way, you would slowly send SOS, did it, da da da, did it, da da da, did it, is what it would sound like in Morse code. And this would be the international distress call for soliciting help. Incidentally, this can be done in other means besides radio. You could use flashlights. You could use tapping on something, as long as this code is conveyed. Did it, da da da, did it. So don't feel as though you would ever be restricted to that. This goes very well for you aspiring Eagle Scouts here. This plays very well with your emergency preparedness badge for sure. That concludes these requirements for 9A3 and 9A4. Next, we're actually going to engage in actual on-air operating with requirements 7, 9A, and 9A5 and 9A6.